All right, is this thing on? Can everyone hear me? Let's get started. So, this is Prometheus for Agile Teams. I'll be your host, Andrew Burian, and in this talk, we're talking about delivering value with Prometheus, enabling us to build monitoring systems the same way we build our software systems, in an agile fashion, changing requirements, uncertain assumptions, and continuously delivering value. Little prerequisite introduction about me. I'm Andrew. I'm the lead SRE at a company called Axiom Zen, and I've been involved in the design and creation of monitoring systems for every one of Axiom Zen's projects for about the last 3 years. We've been running Prometheus in production as our standard choice for about 3 years now, and I've helped oversee the launch of very successful projects, complete failure projects, very small projects, and very large projects, from kind of all over the spectrum of the software space. If you haven't heard of Axiom Zen before, you're not alone, but you might know us for one of our other portfolio companies. If you use GitHub, we made ZenHub. If you use Tabs and Chrome, we made Toby. Most recently, we're famous for CryptoKitties. We're the company behind Dapper Labs. We made Cheese Wizards, and most recently, NBA Top Shot. It's a lot of different projects, and it's a lot of different spaces. And it's been really interesting to build this many different projects in this many different environments. But throughout all this, you learn that some things are constant in any of these projects, regardless of the size or scale, and I've found that how you build monitoring is one of them. At some point in your monitoring life, you will hear a question like this. You need to be paying attention to when you build your monitoring, where you're spending your time and effort, because if you hear this question, you should raise a flag. When you hear this question, you might be tempted to roll your eyes so hard you fall out of your chair, because the answer is obviously yes. Do we need to be monitoring? Yes. But if you survive the initial shock of having someone ask you this question, it's important to look past this and hear what the question actually is, because it probably means that your team is not getting the value out of your monitoring that they need to be. The real question underneath this is, what do we need to be monitoring? We struggle a lot in all of our projects with the upfront cost of building proper monitoring. And do we need to do this right now? Can we afford to cut this somewhere else? Apply the principle of measure what you care about, and it makes it so much easier. You stop measuring things you don't care about, you cut off all the CPU graphs and AppDex scores that really don't give you any value, and you build things that people actually care about. People do not want to build something they don't care about. No one wants to work on a feature that no users use. If you think about what you want to monitor and you monitor it, you build good habits. If you monitor kind of things at random, it creates bad practices, and that becomes a norm. Bad practices lead to projects that are painful to work on and impossible to debug. You guys may have heard of this little thing called CryptoKitties. Again, if you haven't, this was our foray into blockchain projects that got us started. Ethereum was but a young blockchain, and we thought to ourselves, what makes new technology successful? We had the options of gambling, porn, or cats. We didn't want to get a gambling license. Porn was kind of off the table, so we made cats. We kind of expected it to be a little pet project. It was a bit of good fun, but god damn does the internet like cats. Like, way more cats than we ever expected to produce in our lifetime. We went from 0 users and having contingency plans on what to do if no one showed up for our launch, to being the largest Ethereum contract in about the span of 4 days. The graph here is the backlog of Ethereum transactions waiting to be processed. About 4 days in, there was 20,000 backlog transactions, and we were getting some threats from notable exchanges on Ethereum for backlogging their work with cats. In all this, we had the data from Ethereum because someone had built that monitoring, but we had no idea what was going on with our application. We had no idea where the load was going to come from. We hadn't built the monitoring up front because we did not think we would need it. We had a smattering of AppDex scores and error rates. It just told us that everything was definitely on fire, with no hope to hell of figuring out where it was coming from. We did eventually recover. CryptoKitties survived and is still up today. And we learned a big lesson about planning for success and building our monitoring up front, and not taking, do we need to monitor this? It's just a little prototype as an answer for things. So I'm going to walk you through an experiment. Stop me if this sounds familiar. You've got a project on the go, and you go, this is going to be the best thing we've ever built. I need to monitor it, obviously, because you're an intelligent person. And the question is how? What are you going to use? What tools are you going to use? How are you going to set it up? You have to make a ton of assumptions in software development. We make assumptions all the time, and as an industry, we're getting better at being explicit about making the assumptions. We spend our time to write them down, we have processes to catch them when they're wrong and correct them, so we're pretty good at this in terms of our software development. But monitoring tends to not get the same treatment. It's still a software project. You still have assumptions about what your data is going to be, how much you need to monitor it, where the bottlenecks are, what's going to come from where, but these assumptions aren't user-facing, so they tend to just slide under the radar. So, you're a bright cookie. You know that you have to make some assumptions about your data, and you're pretty sure that you've done this before, so you'll get them all right the first time. So you think it out, you know where your data is going to come from, and you're like, all right, I got this. It's still a big decision to decide what your monitoring tool is going to be. So again, you're a smart, deliberate, careful developer. You're going to write a proof of concept. We all know that the proof of concept piece of software that you build always is just a miniature version of the final product. It's the same thing all the way up, and you're ready to go. So you bang up your little POC, you got some metrics plumbed through it, now you're ready to start experimenting with vendors. So you get a monitoring tool in there, you slap on your POC, it goes, yep, that looks right, you're all hunky-dory. Let's go ahead. You've done your due diligence. Let's go get signed with the vendor. Your vendor is smiling at you, waiting for you to sign up. So you go ahead and write the contract. You've chosen your tool for the next 3 years. You sign a 3-year deal with New Dog Monitoring. Your VP is happy because, hey, that's a checkbox off your pre-launch list. Finance gets a sweet deal because you signed that 3-year contract. Everything works exactly right the first time. Except the devs are all really, really angry all the time, and we have this edge case we didn't account for. We can probably work around it. The data volume's way larger than we expected because we accidentally put cats in the blockchain again. I mean, we can work around it, but the sales guy is also like hanging out in my backyard. I guess we can just buy more space from him. Do we really need to monitor the database right now, or can we cut that back a bit? The data model doesn't actually quite match where the product's landed a year down the road. I mean, we only have 2 more years left of this contract. Can we just make it work? So, shockingly, your assumptions turn out to be wrong some of the time, all of the time, every time. We've learned this as an industry. Software design with rigid requirements up front never is going to survive contact with the real world. In the best case, your assumptions are close and you just slightly regret some of the decisions imposed by the tools that you're working on and some of the restrictions that you can't quite get around the way you want. In the worst case, you got to bail out of that contract 6 months into it. You got to redo all your proof of concept work. The VP of Engineering is breathing down your neck. It's just not a good time. We never do this, being the intelligent developers we are, and we certainly never did this on a little project for the International Fencing Federation we did a couple of years ago. It's a cool project if you're a fan of fencing. The FIA's got a neat site now and a brand new web app. We don't maintain it or anything, we just kind of built it and gave it to them, but there's something to be said about a sport where you stab your opponents, so go take a look. The FIE is a very grand traditional structure. It was a very traditional project, very traditional timeline, very traditional deliverables document, and we fell into the very, very easy trap of designing and delivering the monitoring in exactly the same way. We collected the requirements up front, designed it on paper, it was going to be delivered at the end, it was going to be perfect. We got about 30% of the way into the project before I realized what a terrible mistake that we made and regretted the whole thing. I'm still proud of the final product, I'll have you know, but the panicked iteration that we had to do in the middle of the project, I'm a little less proud about. Really, as an industry, we've learned this. This is waterfall development. This is agile development. The principles of agile development at this point should be second nature to all of us. Continuously deliver valuable software. Welcome changing requirements. Simplicity above all else. We've centered so much of our industry around like these principles and how to do these things. It's amazing that we just throw them out when it comes to designing monitoring systems. So how can we build our monitoring systems the same way that we build agile software? So let's pretend that the monitoring is a service that we deliver to our customers, the dev team. If you're a big enough organization like ours, we have a dedicated SRE that provides this infrastructure, this may literally be your case, in which case, congratulations, you got a heck of a team. But this is still a really good framework to work in, even if you're small enough that the devs are the same people that have to build the monitoring stack. Treat it like a separate project that has to be delivered unto you. And so with any project where you have to get something going to get it out the door, especially since you're blocking production for this, deliver the MVP of the product as soon as possible. The smallest full stack slice of functionality that starts to do your job. Your requirements will change. No assumptions will hold. You've got to plan for it. You have to build the first prototype and get it started. This is the part where it actually becomes a Prometheus talk, because Prometheus lets us do a lot of interesting things with these assumptions and these requirements in mind. The pull model for data divorces the concerns of producing the metrics from the collection, storage, processing that comes later down the pipeline. This means that you can just start and you can change all of that system later without having to change the bit that produces the metrics. Let the devs do the metrics problem and let you build the monitoring system later. As a slight side note, this is, in my opinion, what open tracing gets a bit wrong, where you have to compile the open tracing tracer into your program, and if you want to change it, you got to recompile it. It's a side note, but open tracing, please, why did you do this to us? Anyway, the default Prometheus libraries in most languages are not flashy, to be perfectly honest. We work in Go. The Go libraries are acceptable. They give you Go routines. They work. The Prometheus server has that built-in metrics explorer. Is it ugly as sin? Yes, it's really, really, really is, and the React version is not that much better. But it does let you explore your metrics from day one. You plunk it down, it's good to go. So you toss it in a container and you chuck it into production, and there you go. You have the MVP of your metric stack. That alone is your first deliverable. Prometheus comes out of the box ready to deliver that, and you're ready to go. The devs can start using it and they can start iterating on their metrics while you're working on building whatever it is that's going to ingest your metrics later. We built a blockchain because we're sadists and we hate ourselves, but also because it's a fun project. And when developing the Flow blockchain, developers need to test like a half a dozen different test networks at the same time at once. 300 nodes running in GCP regions across the world, and they want to collect metrics from it. We decided that Prometheus was pretty much the only logical choice for instrumenting this code base, since it was going to be run by who knows where down the line, and everyone will ingest Prometheus metrics. So we went Prometheus, top to bottom. Prometheus server, set up with the GCP instance discovery plugin, which is again built in, was an instant MVP for full functioning monitoring. Before I'd even thought about how robust collection of Prometheus metrics was going to work, we just plunked one of those boxes down, set it going. It was ugly as sin, and the devs could use it day one. And then they shared their screenshots in Slack as their way of communicating metrics, because the Prometheus URLs are ugly as sin and take up the entire page of text in Slack. But it worked. And it let them iterate. It let them learn what metrics were useful to them, what metrics weren't, what they were actually trying to monitor, and meanwhile the SRE team was working up on a Grafana Cortex hybrid monstrosity for proper long-term storage of this. So when that actually comes up and is ready, we'll be ready. For now, they're happy. One of the unspoken tenets of, I think, not necessarily agile development, but software development in general, that I think doesn't get enough credit, is that you should always build your applications anticipating for some success. Don't build CryptoKitties where you expect it to fail. Build it expecting to 2 times or 5 times your usage if everything goes well. But you can't and you should not assume that your system will survive a 50-fold increase in usage or a 100-fold increase in usage or a 1,000-fold increase in usage. You're always going to have to radically change if that problem, which is a good problem, happens. The things that worked for you on day 1 might be good for you on day 2. Those assumptions don't apply 100 days down. At some point, you should consider a completely different solution. You can start in Prometheus with just a standalone server running on a virtual machine and graduate yourself up to a multi-redundant polling instance, pushing to Cortex, solving world hunger, whatever you need it to do later when you actually need it and when the project actually has legs under it. We built another project called Toby for Tabs that was a fun Chrome plugin that turns your tabs into sort of a Trello board of issues. This was another surprise success because it turns out people have a lot of Chrome tabs. And unlike CryptoKitties, it wasn't bottlenecked by a blockchain to hold it back and we could just blame Ethereum for all of its woes. We came out of the gate with Toby for Tabs with a 200-person beta group that we then opened up to the public, and within about 15 days we had 100,000 users. That number grew to 200,000 in the course of the first few weeks after public launch, and everything was on fire all the time. We spent a lot of work trying to refactor that code base and trying to figure out how the heck to make it more performant with this sudden 100-fold increase in traffic, 1,000-fold increase in traffic. One of the things that suffered excessively was the logging and monitoring. We had built our logging and monitoring systems to debug issues with a 200-person test group. That was its bread and butter. It did it really, really well. When there was 200,000 users, it completely pancaked under the load. We spent probably, honestly, an embarrassing amount of time trying to refactor the monitoring system to handle the load, and eventually we just gave up. We threw the whole monitoring stack out, rewrote it top to bottom, and it worked so much better. The problems that you have when you're a 200-person project does not apply when you're 200,000. Expect to have to work in the agile fashion where you start over and do it again. On the final note, a slightly perhaps more contentious note, is I don't like vendors. I spend a lot of my time negotiating deals with vendors, and I find it a gross process. I don't like asking for deals. They don't like giving me deals. It's a whole thing. The good news about Prometheus and that separation of the production of metrics from the consumption of metrics is you're now a strong independent application, and you don't need no vendor. Prometheus format, or the open metrics format, if you're living in 2030, watching this talk then, hopefully. The Prometheus format, at least, is ubiquitous. If a vendor doesn't support it, you really have no reason to go with that vendor, and the vendor has no excuse not to be supporting it by now. So your vendor will support Prometheus format, so you can send it to them. And if you're a product ingesting Prometheus metrics, there's nothing to keep you from sort of, playing the field. They don't need to know. Dabble around a bit. Do with 2 products at once. When I was doing the flow overhaul, going from the standalone Prometheus instance to our full version, I didn't shut down the existing one. We just collected the metrics twice. You can do that. Don't be afraid to play around and seek out a tool that better fits your needs. Again, the same principle applies, where when you have to 10x your product, or your assumptions have all changed, change your stack, change your vendors. They can deal with it. That's all the time I have, that's all the content I have, and that's probably more than my pay grade anyways. So, I've been Andrew, this has been Prometheus for Agile Teams. Also, we use Prometheus, you use Prometheus, we all like Prometheus. If you want a job, look me up. Have fun. Thanks, kids.
Awesome. We have Andrew on the call. If people have questions, throw them in the Q&A system, or maybe ask them on Slack. Let us know. What do we got first? Is it really going to take us until 2030 to get open metrics done? I hope not.
2031 due to COVID.
I'm not sure what's wrong with that. I have open.
Andrew, are you here?
My home.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Beauty. I don't see any questions yet.
Richie or Brian, do you have any good questions? I'll start out. I'll do one. How do you handle when people are resistant to doing things in an agile way? People who want how do you deal with people who want the giant plan in front of them? Like NASA grade planning, as I call it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that. Where I like having the NASA grade plan in front of me. I really have to force myself to treat things agile sometimes. The most compelling thing that we've found is if you make that mistake once and you actually are good at collecting not metrics data, but data in terms of the process, you can really, really clearly lay it out in front of people next time that like, hey, this worked great on paper, but really, really hurt us down the road. And I think once people have sort of made that mistake once and then tried the better version, you benefit a lot from it. It's super easy to convince people. And if you don't want to have to make that mistake once the first time, as you should, there's lots of people out there that have tons of shared experiences they're willing to put on PromCon talks for the world to see. and then it's much easier to, if you build up a body of evidence that says like this does work and here's lived experience that's close to ours, it's pretty easy to get people to sort of see the light. And also if you can pitch it as saving the upfront planning work, which people do like a lot. There's one question in the chat, why no Grafana? That seems like really low hanging fruit here. We do actually use Grafana. I think the FIE project was the last project we did that did not have Grafana on it. We started using Grafana for everything down the road from there. All the flow stuff is going through Grafana. Yeah, it's exceptionally low hanging fruit. I like the product a lot. I'm not gonna hawk it much more than that because everyone here probably knows Grafana. But I wanted to really drill home the point that whatever your vendor needs are, if you happen to be involved already with Datadog, or you happen to be involved with New Relic, or you happen to have a big plan with Grafana, it's going to work for you regardless if Prometheus is there. And yeah, Grafana is great for starting off because their starter plan is quite cheap, but the other vendors not so much. So starting with Prometheus server and deciding what you need is sort of the way I like to tackle that. So.
One more question that was in there was, do you find the hashmod installation too complicated to implement?
The hashmod installation too complicated to implement. Threw us for a loop at first. I don't actually use it that much, so I can't actually weigh in super deeply on the hashmod stuff. Yeah, I think most of the complicated features that are in any monitoring pipeline, I've found that aren't needed for the MVP. So you kind of all of those things you can collectively cut out. Again, this is the advantage of trying to do just the minimum of what you need at the beginning. Is just start with like, hey, the thing that gets you out the door. If it's complicated and it's wasting your time, you probably don't need to do it for the MVP. Come back at it when you have a team of 5 people and you got revenue under your belt, and then do it again. If you are doing this for the 5th or 6th time, then you can start spending your effort doing more complicated things. So. I don't know if your audio died or my audio died there, but I can see the question, how do you deal with long-term storage metrics meant to face that problem? Again, our solution to this problem was Grafana. The Grafana team has been super great to us, and we use their hosted Prometheus, which I think is Cortex under the hood. We did originally throw down just a Prometheus VM that we just gave it a big disk and told it to hold on to things for a year. It wasn't until we sort of blew through that VM's ability to process metrics that we actually moved to the basically engaged Grafana and moved to Cortex, and that's not been a problem for us since. We're super happy with that. But we do, on our prototypes, we do still occasionally throw down just like a random VM with a bunch of disk on it and say, funnel it to there first until we decide what we actually want to monitor, and then we'll pay the vendor to ingest it and keep it for us long term. But yeah, super happy with Cortex and Grafana for that point for us.
Nothing coming in on Slack.
Sometimes you give a talk that's just so clear you don't need follow-up questions. It's fine.
Oh yeah. A question from Slack is, how do you handle alerts and paging?
So interestingly, we used a combination. We started off with the alert manager from Prometheus, which worked quite well. But we found the way this is getting into sort of know your own code base. Idiosyncrasies around how our deployments worked meant that alert manager was quite difficult for us because configuring the alert manager config files across all the teams was actually a bit difficult. So this is where we played around a whole bunch to land on a system that worked better for us. And we actually ended up using Grafana's native alerting platform plumbed through to PagerDuty. There's some people that everyone I've spoken to has had strong opinions on this, either very for or very against. Lots of people really swear by just the native Prometheus alert manager, and I really do like alert manager. And again, it was tough to say like, hey, the way that we're deployed, actually, this is not the best tool, and actually letting the vendor handle this for us is the better way to do it. But after 4 or 5 rounds of trying different things, it was like, oh yeah, like once you're using it, this is very clearly the superior way for us to do it. So yeah, we're Grafana Grafana and PagerDuty. But yeah, we have done alert manager in the past. Before we were PagerDuty, we had some VictorOps stuff going on. Yeah, we've played around a lot in like the 3 years that we've been building monitoring systems, but that's where we've ended up so far.
What was the difficulty with the alert manager that you were having?
So all of our stuff is sort of squirreled away in Kubernetes, and the way that our sort of I alluded to, like, Axiom Zen has a lot of projects, and the way we handle our contractors, the way we handle our teams, we basically have one ginormous shared Prometheus cluster the SRE team runs, and we basically sell time on that to other teams. So it meant we had to be sort of super restrictive around who can access and edit what things in what domains of the cluster. And as the SRE team was providing the alerting pipeline as a service, we basically had Alert Manager running in our namespace under our configurations, and giving teams arbitrary edit access to it was dangerous, and left open the SRE namespace to a lot of people. So we had tossed up the idea of either using the Prometheus operator to give people their own alert managers, or just have everyone run a copy of Alert Manager themselves. It worked okay, but then ultimately, just like the click and done UI of doing it through the Grafana thing let the teams chew through it faster. Prometheus was a new tool to a lot of people when we first rolled it out, so getting the hang of that alert language and getting the hang of like the querying language for alerting was better done in the visual tool that people could sort of sink their teeth into. We do have one team that is going to potentially do what I said earlier, where they're going to run their own alert manager and point it at Cortex. They're totally able to. That's something we support, but the one that we provide out of the gate is the Grafana one. So
it sounds like more multi-tenancy support in the alert manager might help.
Yeah, generally multi-tenancy is something that I like to see a lot in projects because of the way that we run, but I get that that's not like a common use case for people.
Yep. I see some people typing on Slack. Ooh, one of the Prometheus developers on Slack says that there is work going on to make the Alert Manager CRD allow for better multi-tenancy.
Ooh, I'm excited. It's again, the whole premise of this talk is that, like, if a better tool comes along or the industry changes, I'm super happy to change with it. So I always we definitely have beta projects. So like Cheese Wizard was a great example of a project that we just sort of like threw together and fired out, and like we tested a whole bunch of things that we weren't sure about on it, and it was a bit of a complete disaster. But yeah, if Alert Manager guys want me to beta the multi-tenancy CRD, I'm totally happy to.
Awesome.